Hey folks, I want to take just a couple of minutes to do this super quick review and clarification presentation. I've taken a look at the drafts that you've uploaded, and I've also fielded questions from students, and so I have some understanding of what's working well, and there's a lot working well, and some of the little issues that are happening as we're working on project number 2. So I've put together this document and this little presentation to address a few of those issues. Number 1, some students are a little worried about or concerned about whether or not they can use anecdotal evidence in the first paragraphs, those analytical paragraphs about patterns. And some of this comes from the fact that students are writing on discourses with which they're familiar. They're part of this discourse, and so they want to know if they can use personal experience. The answer is yes, you can bring in personal experience, but it cannot be the only evidence that you're bringing in. That is, that if you decide to bring in personal experience, you need to connect that personal experience to specific evidence that you're pulling from websites or manuals or wherever else you're getting the information of your discourse. These paragraphs cannot solely rely on your anecdotal support. So yes, but you need the other evidence as well. Now, I also want to address what's happening in the second section here, where you guys are drawing those conclusions about the cultural values or cultural narratives and myths or ideologies that underpin the patterns that you see. And I want to draw a distinction between how I understand pattern and what you do with that pattern. And so let me give you a specific example from a project a student did last semester. Last semester, I had a student who did a project on the discourse of Disney princesses. And so in this project, one of the patterns that the student obviously saw was that Disney crafts princesses in a lot of different ways and for different demographics. And so there was this pattern of princesses. So that was the first part. But then when it came to the question of what cultural narratives do you see, or what ideologies or what values underpin that, the conversation went from talking about princesses to talking about things like beauty standards and myths of marriage, etc. In other words, the student saw in her investigation that all of these princesses and the way that Disney used all of these princesses demonstrated that there are certain values in common, that there are ways of thinking about beauty and ways of thinking about relationships, etc. And so hopefully that gives you a clear distinction between the sort of conversation that's happening in those pattern-based paragraphs and the sort of conversation that's then happening in the second section. Now, also, I have a couple questions that students had asked me about the third section, about connections. And for me, the easy way of understanding the connections is to just move directly from your conversation about patterns your conversation about narratives and ideologies, and ask yourself this question. In which other discourses with which I'm familiar do I see similar values and ideologies at play? And so you're making the move not from the patterns, but from the values and the ideologies. And then, of course, you may see similar patterns, but you may not. You may see that there are radically different patterns in other discourses that are also underpinned by the very same value systems. I hope that that clarifies a little bit. Now, I want to spend just a couple of moments talking about the formatting, because I've also fielded questions on this. And the good news is this. I am not forcing a specific format for this assignment. I'm not saying the assignment must be done with regard to MLA format. Instead, I want everybody just to make sure that they've covered those 3 sections, and that when it comes to the evidence they're bringing in, they clarify where all of that evidence comes from. So, if you're bringing in information from a website, it's very easy to mention the name of the website in your prose, in your writing. If you're getting information from a manual, you can very much give me a hyperlink to the manual or mention the name of the manual. The idea here is that you can attribute all of the information to the source from which you're working, right? I do not need a works cited page that does that. You can do it all in text. You also can decide whether you want your paper to just be an essay, all right, or whether you want to include pictures and hyperlinks and all of that good stuff. And you can see that now when you look at what different classmates are doing. So you may also want to use subheadings, for example. So you have the title of the paper, and then you have a heading about the first section, a heading about the second section, a heading about the third section, etc. The idea here is that I'm not forcing you to write in an academic format, but I am asking you to be fair to the outside research that you do bring in. I hope that that clarifies a little bit. Now, your final for this assignment comes in a week, and over the next week, I'm asking that we help each other. And so you're going to be providing some assistance to your fellow classmates with regard to their own drafts. And then I ask that you sharpen your draft or your draft, turn it into your final, and upload it by next Thursday, April 26th. If you have questions, let me know. Take care.